A mystery that got solved only to lead to another deeper mystery.
Julian Hernandez discovered he'd been missing for 13 years, kidnapped from Alabama by his father, Bobby, and given a new name.
One moment, they were gone, swallowed by time, distance, or sheer mystery. Families mourned, authorities searched, and hope quietly faded. Years, even decades later, some of these vanished souls stepped back into the world as if no time had passed. Their return raised haunting questions.
Many people go through an identity crisis at some point in their lives, but not like this. One man woke up 8 years ago without the slightest idea of who he was.
A man reappeared in the very clothes he vanished in, and another discovered his entire identity was built on a lie. These aren't ghost tales, but true puzzles that refuse to be solved. Here are 15 who vanished and mysteriously returned. Tanya Ryder. In September 2007, Tanya Ryder's life was moving at a relentless pace. She was juggling 2 jobs, working long shifts with little rest in between. On the night of September 20th, after finishing an exhausting shift at a Maple Valley supermarket in Washington state, she got into her blue Honda to drive home. But somewhere along Highway 169, fatigue overtook her. Her car veered off the road, plunging into a 20-foot ravine thick with blackberry bushes. Hidden from view, Tanya's world turned upside down. Literally, the car flipped, pinning her inside. Her ribs were fractured, her arm dislocated, and her leg trapped against the steering wheel. This was the space where she felt numbness for days, drifting in and out of consciousness, her cell phone lighting up with missed calls from her husband, Tom. She hallucinated dialing 911, imagining operators mocking her desperate pleas for help. And more than that is the scene of agony experienced by Tom. He knew that Tanya was not the type who left willingly. Thus, he reported her missing immediately. This is how it was when his case went to the police. By the police, he was brushed off for she is an adult who may choose to leave when reported missing. Suspicion was more on him than on the subject of the crime. Officers raided his home, interrogated him, and even made him take the polygraph. Meanwhile, Tanya writhed in pain just miles away. After days of scrutiny, authorities finally traced the last signal from her phone to an area near Highway 169. Within 20 minutes of searching, they found the wreckage. Tanya was barely clinging to life, severely dehydrated. Rescuers cut through the crushed car and airlifted her to safety. Tanya opened her eyes in the hospital, and by her bedside was Tom, holding her hand. He kept at it, and that was what saved her. For 8 agonizing days, she had to go through one ordeal after another. Not very long after the accident itself, when there would have been health caregivers who could have helped by now. 8 days trapped was only the beginning. Our next story takes us somewhere even more baffling. Jodie Roberts. In 1985, Jodie Roberts was a fearless and determined investigative journalist from Washington state, known for digging into difficult stories. But beneath her professional drive, friends noticed a growing weight on her shoulders. She seemed distant, preoccupied, and slowly began withdrawing from her once vibrant life. Then, one afternoon, she vanished without a trace. Her car was found abandoned, her cats rehomed, her bank account emptied. To those left behind, it was baffling. There were no signs of foul play, no ransom note, no final goodbye. Police and family searched for years, her photo appearing in newspapers and on missing person bulletins. But the trail went cold. Her family feared the worst, that Jodie had been slain or had taken her own life. Unknown to others, Jodie lived under an entirely new identity. When Jodie was found in a Colorado mall shortly after her disappearance, she possessed only a Toyota car key and a blank notebook. She didn't know her name, where she was from, or how she had gotten there. The doctors diagnosed Jodie with dissociative amnesia. With no memory of her past, she abbreviates a new name, Jane D., and starts her life all over again. Jane later moved to Alaska, where she eventually married and raised what amounted to twins twice over. For 12 years, she led a quiet life, never looking back. Only when a colleague saw a news report on the missing journalist, Jodie Roberts, did the past raise its head. The resemblance was uncanny. The DNA confirmed the truth. Jane and Jodie were one person. Having found Jodie again with her family, no explanations were given. Severing ties was something she had done deliberately before her disappearance. She gave one interview in 1997 and then disappeared into obscurity again. She lives quietly today in Oregon, which is some kind of proof that sometimes the very deep mysteries are the ones chosen for oneself. Carlos Sanchez Ortiz de Salazar. For nearly 2 decades, Dr. Carlos Sanchez Ortiz de Salazar was little more than a name carved into memory. A highly respected Spanish doctor, fluent in several languages and admired by patients and colleagues, Carlos appeared to have everything: intelligence, prestige, and a promising future. Yet in November 1996, he abruptly walked away from his life, leaving behind confusion and grief. With no note, no warning, and no farewell, he vanished into the shadows. His family searched tirelessly, but the years wore on without answers. Eventually, in 2010, he was declared legally dead. Then came a twist that no one could have predicted. In 2015, 2 mushroom pickers wandering deep in the forests of Tuscany stumbled upon what looked like an abandoned campsite. Scattered cans and bottles surrounded a crude shelter. But before they could leave, a frail man emerged from the trees. His beard was long, his clothes ragged, and his eyes weary. "I am Spanish," he said softly. "My name is Carlos. I have been here since 1997. I do not want to live among people." The pickers started yelling for help to the authorities. It was soon followed by a forest ranger, and Carlos eventually showed his passport. The news spread like fire in Europe. The person who was supposedly dead and buried,
a hermit who was presumed dead after disappearing 20 years ago, has been found alive and living in a forest in Tuscany,
was alive and hiding from the conveniences of his society. Why he disappeared is still not clear. Some say a career in medicine, which puts too much retreat into, drives some people into solitude. Others say personal problems forced him into this retreat. His family rushed to Italy, desperate to convince him to return home. But Carlos did not budge. Although he was not legally a missing person, his choice of solitude ensured he remained lost to those who loved him most. Julian Hernandez. For most of his childhood, Julian Hernandez believed he was just like everyone else, an ordinary boy with a father who cared for him. He excelled in school, stayed out of trouble, and by the time he was 18, he was preparing to apply for college. But when he began filling out his paperwork, something strange happened. His social security number didn't match his name. At first, he and his guidance counselor assumed it was a clerical error. Yet, as they dug deeper, the inconsistencies multiplied. What they uncovered would forever change his understanding of who he was. Julian wasn't Julian at all. He was a missing child. 13 years earlier, at just 5 years old, he had been kidnapped from Alabama by his own father, Bobby Hernandez, in the middle of a bitter custody battle. His mother reported him missing in 2002, launching a desperate search that stretched on for years with no leads. Meanwhile, Bobby had built a false life for them in Cleveland, Ohio, under new identities. Julian grew up unaware of the truth, never suspecting that he was at the center of a decades-long mystery. Incredibly, it was only in 2015 that authorities were alerted for the final time. His father ended up being arrested and charged with kidnapping, custodial interference, and forgery. The case was very complicated. Julian, now a teenager, publicly forgave his father and pleaded with the court for leniency on behalf of Bobby, who had been the only father he knew and whom Julian feared would cause his younger half-sister to suffer. In the end, however, the court sentenced Bobby to 4 years of imprisonment and then 5 years of supervised release. Two worlds colliding, the mother made no attempt at all to find him. Yet the father was the one who had raised him. Julian will have to piece together his identity from shards. His case is among the most moving examples that show how the truth would not always bring an easy resolution, even when it is revealed. Vasile Gorgos. In 1991, Vasile Gorgos, a 63-year-old cattle farmer from a small Romanian village, set out on what should have been a routine business trip. Like countless times before, he purchased his train ticket and assured his family he would return home before nightfall. But this time, he didn't come back. When the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, worry transformed into dread. His family searched tirelessly, but no trace of him could be found. No witnesses, no clues, no explanation. Vasile had simply vanished. With time, grief became a heavy part of their daily lives, and eventually, they were forced to accept what seemed inevitable. He must have died. The 30-year-old absence became home to memories of an aging wife and growing children who had come to adjust to life without him. The impossible astounded everyone on August 29, 2021. A car pulled up just outside the family home, and, frail but aged, stepping out was Vasile, blurry to their eyes, unmistakably the same man they had lost 3 decades back. Even more startling, his disappearance seemed fresh, as did the clothes he wore. In his pocket was the old 1991 train ticket. Vasile would not answer direct questions. His memory remained fragmented. He recognized a few events of his life: childhood, farming, and marriage. He did not recognize his grown children. He kept insisting he had been home for this entire time. Yet no one could decipher what home meant to him. The unknown car that had returned him had long since disappeared. The doctors were astonished to find no evidence of long-term malnutrition or neglect. Physically, he was quite healthy for his age. Now, where he had been during those 30 lost years and who fetched him remain unanswered questions. His return served only to deepen the enigma that had begun with his disappearance. Benjamin Kyle. On a sweltering August day in 2004, a fast food employee made a startling discovery behind a Burger King dumpster in Richmond Hill, Georgia. Lying naked, unconscious, and covered in fire ants was a man with no identification, no belongings, and no explanation. He was bruised, disoriented, and when he finally woke up in a hospital bed, he could only recall one fragment of identity: the name Benjamin. The staff, having nothing else to call him, recorded him as Benjamin Kyle. Doctors quickly realized he was suffering from severe retrograde amnesia. His memory of his past life was completely erased. Police ran his fingerprints, the FBI checked missing persons records, and even DNA databases were scoured for clues. But nothing matched. It was as if Benjamin had never legally existed before that hot summer day. Joey, despite being caught up in a fog of disconnected memory, managed to piece together fragments of a life. Repairing restaurant equipment was natural, and commercial dishwashing turned the memory back to August 29, 1948, his supposed birthday. Formed brothers are faintly recalled, and believed he once lived in Indiana and Colorado. But beyond that, everything is locked away, just out of reach. The 11 long years that Benjamin had lived through, complete with no social security number, unable to work legally, unable to vote, or even open a bank account. Man with no identity. This was how the nation referred to his story, which drew much attention. In 2015, however, the job was cracked by genetic genealogists. It had all come down to a DNA match, which revealed that his birth name was William Burgess Powell, born in Indiana on the same date he had kept. Just before he vanished on his own, he had last been seen by his family in 1976. Lost decades would still prove to be a blank canvas, but his name had been restored. Even as he came closer to the truth, William would never remember the memories of who he had once been. Gabriel Nai. On January 21, 1987, Gabriel Nai picked up the phone and called his wife, Pamela, promising to be home for lunch. It was an ordinary morning in New South Wales, Australia, and nothing seemed unusual. But Gabriel never arrived. The next day, his abandoned car was discovered, a burnt-out wreck on the side of a lonely road. To his family, the nightmare had only just begun. His wife and 2 children, Jennifer and Stefan, clung to hope. But the silence was suffocating. Weeks stretched into months with no answers. Just 2 weeks after his disappearance, a faint trace appeared. Gabriel withdrew cash from his bank account in Newcastle, more than 100 miles away. He purchased camping supplies, a tent, sleeping bag, and rope. After that, nothing. His trail went cold, and the years slowly buried their hope. Pamela eventually moved the family to the Sunshine Coast, keeping their phone number listed, always praying that one day he might call. Then, over 2 decades later, a remarkable breakthrough surfaced. Senior Constable Georgia Robinson, who had spent years reviewing old missing persons cases, located a Medicare record under Gabriel's name. Following this lead, she tracked a certain man living quietly in a small town, working as a caretaker for a local church known as Ron Saunders, a man now devoid of memories of a wife, children, or life once lived. The psychologists concluded Gabriel had been suffering from a dissociative fugue, a rare condition often due to trauma, whereby one's identity and memories are erased, and the person roams into the world to start anew. Thus, he had not left his family behind of his own accord. There had simply been no memory of them. For 2 decades, he was a hollow version of himself. Having been found was a relief, but it also meant confronting a painful truth. His lost years would never come back. Hold on to that thought, because what you're about to hear will take the mystery even deeper. Harold Wayne Lovell. In May 1977, 19-year-old Harold Wayne Lovell left his family home in Chicago, telling his loved ones he was heading to Aurora for a construction job. He never returned. Days turned into weeks, then years, with no word. His family was devastated, and when notorious serial slayer John Wayne Gacy was arrested just a year later, their grief sharpened into horror. Police uncovered the remains of 33 young men beneath Gacy's suburban home, and Lovell's family was certain Harold was among them. The timeline matched, the location made sense, and one of the unidentified victims even resembled him. Adding to their conviction was a piece of jewelry recovered from the graves, which Harold's mother swore belonged to her son. Without advanced DNA testing, they could not confirm it. But for decades, the family mourned him as one of Gacy's many victims. Fast forward to 2011, and the state-of-the-art technology in forensic sciences at that time came into play, and the unique cases of Gacy were reopened for investigation. Teresa, sister of Harold, offered her DNA for comparison purposes, but the shocking result received was that there was no match at all. Harold was never buried under the house of Gacy. The big twist, however, came when a certain Teresa's son, looking for answers, happened to be browsing the internet. and came across a mugshot from Florida. This picture was unmistakably Harold. He was alive. Harold had just moved away for 33 years, while the family believed him dead. Following a family dispute, he chose to take just $56 with him, hopped a train south, and lived a transient existence working odd jobs in shipyards and landscaping. It went from shock to joy when the family met Harold once again. The man already buried in their hearts decades ago was standing before them, alive. Stephen Kubaki. In February 1978, 23-year-old Stephen Kubaki, a Hope College student and avid outdoorsman, set off alone on a cross-country ski trip along the frozen shores of Lake Michigan. He had taken trips like this before, but this time he didn't return. When he failed to come home, searchers combed the area and soon found unsettling clues. His backpack and skis were abandoned near the edge of the lake, and footprints trailed across the snow for 200 yards, then abruptly stopped. There were no return tracks, no sign of struggle, and no evidence of him falling through the ice. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Authorities feared the worst, believing he had drowned in the treacherous waters of the so-called Lake Michigan Triangle, an area notorious for strange disappearances. Weeks turned into months with no answers. His family prepared themselves for the reality that he was gone forever. 15 months later, on May 5, 1979, Stephen again appeared. He knocked on the door of his father's home in Massachusetts, dirty and ragged, but alive. By his own claim, he could not comprehend how so much time could have slipped by. He explained that he had awoken in a grassy field some 700 miles away, in strange clothing, and carrying a bag with random maps and objects that he did not recognize. In a strange twist, he added that one of the shirts he had on was from a marathon he could not even remember attending. Even under close questioning, Stephen told everyone that he had no recollection of where he had been or what had happened to him during those 15 lost months. He refused to be evaluated by a psychiatrist, repeating again that before he vanished, his life had been normal. To this day, the mystery of his sudden disappearance remains one of the most baffling and eerie unresolved cases of our recent history. Tanya Cotch. In 1996, 14-year-old Tanya Cotch was like any other teenager in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, struggling with school, friends, and the challenges of growing up. But her life changed forever when she crossed paths with Thomas Hose, a middle-aged security guard at her school. Exploiting her vulnerability, Jose groomed Tanya with attention and false promises of love. When she ran away from home, he convinced her to stay with him, and what began as teenage rebellion quickly turned into a decade-long captivity. At first, Tanya was confined to a locked bedroom in Jose's home, just 2 miles away from where her frantic family searched for her. She was hidden away from the world, forced to eat when allowed, bathe under his supervision, and even use a bucket as a toilet. Jose's elderly parents and adult son lived in the same house, yet they turned a blind eye to the frightened girl behind a locked door. For 4 years, Tanya barely saw the outside world. The time came when Jose loosened his hold, although he wouldn't let go of control. Dyeing her hair, changing her name to Nikki Allen, and presenting her as a girlfriend were his amazing creative imagination. Just really for his eyes, she was working at a local convenience store. She had been silenced with threats and psychological torment. Desperate in 2006, Tanya made a decision. Whispering her real name in front of her store manager, the police arrived by nightfall. Her nightmare ended. Within minutes of reuniting with her father at the station, the two fell into tears, mourning a decade stolen. Jose was convicted, but there were no kidnapping charges because Tanya originally went willingly. Therefore, it was only 15 years for assault and corruption, a ridiculously light sentence for the horror of a decade. Nevertheless, the survival of Tanya remains a powerful testimony of bravery and will to fight back, reclaiming one's life. John Darwin. John Darwin was always chasing something: money, security, a way out of the debts that weighed heavily on him. A former teacher, prison officer, and part-time banker, he lived with his wife Anne in Hartlepool, England. But by 2002, the couple was drowning financially. That March, John set out alone on a canoe trip in the North Sea. Hours later, he failed to return. His paddle was recovered, and weeks later, his wrecked canoe washed ashore. To the outside world, it appeared he had drowned. Anne played the grieving widow, and their two sons mourned their father. In 2003, John was declared legally dead. Anne collected nearly £250,000 in life insurance and pension payouts, seemingly securing the family's financial future. But behind closed doors, the story was far stranger. John wasn't dead at all. He was hiding in a secret passageway that connected his home to a rented bedsit next door. For years, he slipped through the wardrobe entrance, living in the shadows while the world believed him gone. Thus, they moved to Panama and bought properties, thereby starting afresh, inspired by their success. The revelation of their secret turned out to be an unassailable one until a smiling photograph of the two was posted online by a real estate agent. Their deception fell apart very swiftly. Once in 2007, John returned to the UK, traveled to a police station, and alleged that he had lost his memory. Facts, however, beg to differ. The facts state that both of them were convicted of fraud in 2008. John was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in jail, while Anne received 6 years and 6 months, notwithstanding her assertion that she had been forced into it. Terribly devastated because of this betrayal, their sons decided to abandon their parents. It still lingers in the memory of people as one of the most infamous cases of deception in England. Kamiya Mobly. On July 10, 1998, 16-year-old Shannara Mobly gave birth to her daughter, Kamiya, at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida. But within hours, her joy turned to heartbreak. A woman in a nurse's uniform calmly told Shannara she needed to take the baby for routine tests. Minutes later, the woman walked out with Kamiya and never returned. The kidnapper, Gloria Williams, had recently miscarried and, desperate to escape her abusive relationship, decided to steal a baby to raise as her own. She vanished with Kamiya, leaving Shannara to grieve and search for years. The case made national news, and the hospital eventually paid Shannara a $1.5 million settlement, but no compensation could heal her loss. Through her early years in South Carolina, Gloria gave the infant the name Alexis Manigault and raised her in what appeared to be an ordinary, loving home. Alexis grew up never suspecting that everything in her life was based on a lie. In 2016, when Alexis applied for a job and realized she could not present a birth certificate, the lie began to unravel. Gloria, confronted, admitted the truth. DNA testing showed Alexis was Kamiya Mobly. The reunion was a bittersweet one. Kamiya loved Gloria, the only mom she had ever known, while Shannara grieved for the lost years. In 2018, Gloria Williams was sentenced to 18 years in prison, but the scars may never heal. Denise Bolser. On January 17, 1985, 23-year-old Denise Denny Bolser of Raymond, New Hampshire, disappeared under circumstances as strange as they were chilling. That morning, her husband came home to find a note pinned to their refrigerator. It read, "We've got your wife." There were no signs of forced entry and no ransom demands. Days later, his truck was discovered abandoned at Logan Airport in Boston, with Denise's Social Security card, credit cards, and birth certificate neatly placed on the seat. Yet, Denise herself had vanished without a trace. The investigators viewed the case as a possible kidnapping in the beginning, but later another theory emerged as they delved into the matter. Denise, a bookkeeper, was accused of embezzling nearly $100,000 from her employer. The 1986 case charged her in absentia, but her location remained a mystery to the law for her to face trial. The charges were dismissed in 1993, but by then she was already a ghost story in her town. Her family held on to hope for years, but Denise never came back. There are no authenticated sightings at the moment, and she remains missing. What really happened, whether she did run away from threats or got silenced before she could explain, has become one of New Hampshire's most confusing cold cases. Dr. William Horatio Bates. In the early 1900s, Dr. William Horatio Bates was a respected New York ophthalmologist, admired for his medical work and success. But on August 30th, 1902, he vanished. That morning, he sent his wife Ada a hurried note saying he had urgent surgeries to attend to. After that, silence. Ada began a desperate search, enlisting family, friends, and even the Masonic Society. Reports soon placed Bates in London at Charing Cross Hospital. When Ada rushed to meet him, her relief quickly turned to despair. The man before her looked gaunt and hollow-eyed, and, most shockingly, he denied knowing her, telling her flatly, "We are strangers." She brought him to the Savoy Hotel with the hope that time might restore his memory, but he disappeared in a couple of days and, this time, was gone for years. Ada never saw him again and died without an answer. In 1910, long after her death, a colleague identified Bates in Grand Forks, North Dakota. He was alive, practicing quietly as an eye doctor, definitely removed from an earlier life in New York. He eventually returned to Manhattan, but never gave any details about his whereabouts. Whether mental illness, dissociative amnesia, or something darker, Bates's vanishing remains one of medical history's biggest enigmas. Don't go anywhere. The very next story in our countdown is a real mind-bender. Steve Carter. For most of his life, Steve Carter believed he had a normal story. Adopted as a toddler, he grew up in New Jersey, never questioning the past he didn't know. Adoption, to him, was just part of who he was. But in 2011, everything changed. After reading about a woman who discovered she had been kidnapped as a child, Steve's curiosity was sparked. Acting on instinct, he typed "Hawaii missing baby" into a database. What appeared on the screen stunned him. A photo of a little boy who looked exactly like him. Initially brushing it off as a coincidence, a friend pressed him to take action. DNA tests confirmed the terrible truth. Steve was not Steve Carter at all. He was Mark's Panama Moriarty Barnes, a baby who was kidnapped from Hawaii in 1977. The story unfolded. His mother, Charlotte Moriarty, disappeared with him when he was 6 months old. She was later institutionalized under a false name, while baby Marks was placed into custody under an entirely fabricated background. Adopted by a loving family as Steve Carter, he grew up never knowing the truth about his origins. After 34 years of waiting, Mark Barnes was finally getting answers. The reunion was somewhat bittersweet. On the other hand, Charlotte was still missing, her fate unknown. Mysteries like these remind us that some stories don't end when people vanish. They only begin again when they return. Which one shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and hit subscribe for more strange and fascinating stories. And if you're ready for your next mystery, just click on one of the videos now showing on your screen.